we are going to discuss about the springs and the types of the springs. A spring is a machine element that can deflect under the application of the loads. Now in the present days, we can observe the application part of the spring in number of industries or in regular purposes. For example, the major application parts in three areas. The first area is it can be used for observe the shock loads. For example, if you take a vehicle suspension systems, so this vehicle system suspension system is used a machine element called as a spring for absorbing the shock loads produces during the running of a automobile. Now the springs are also can be used for store the energy. For example, if you take a clocks or toys, the springs are the machine elements that can be used in these particular devices for storing the energy. Springs can also be used for measuring the forces. For example, if you take a weigh measuring device, the spring is a machine element that can be used to weigh a particular load for measuring the forces. So, based on the shape of the springs, you can classify springs into several types: a helical springs and a leaf springs. Now these helical springs and leaf springs can be further classified into compression springs, extension springs, and torsion springs. Now the difference between these compression and extension springs means when a load is acting on a particular spring is trying to compress it along the axis of the spring, then it is called as a compression spring. When the load is trying to elongate the spring along the axis, then it is called as a extension springs. We can also classify these helical springs into closely coiled helical springs and open coiled helical springs. So the difference between these closely coiled helical spring and openly coiled helical spring is if the helix angle of the coil is less than 10 degrees, then it is called as a closely coiled helical spring. If the helix angle alpha is greater than 10 degrees, then it is called as a open coiled helical springs. In closely coiled helical springs, the helix angle or the plane of the coil is almost at right angles to the axis of the spring. Now, one more classification under helical springs is torsional helical springs. In the compression helical springs and a extension helical springs, the load is acting along the axis of the spring. But in torsional helical springs, the load is acting at a distance of r from the center of the spring. Now, in the following figure, the loads, a combination of loads P, which are acted at a distance of r from the center, which produces a torsion in the spring, which is known as a torsional helical springs. And the final classification is a leaf springs. A leaf springs is a laminated type of springs, which is a combination of several semi-elliptical plates. So in the next video, we are going to discuss about these types of leaf springs and the design of helical springs.